A small part of Detroit, in a zip code where conversations along a postal route give a history of the city revealed through letter carrier Wendell Watkins, on the job for nearly 30 years.
I always thought it would be a pretty cool gig because you get paid pretty well, and you don't have a boss on you all the time. You get to meet a lot of people. It's kind of, I always thought it was kind of cool because, like I said, my grandfather did it, and I thought he was like the coolest guy in the world.
I grew up in Highland Park. Went to Barber Middle School, Highland Park High School, and then I transferred to Cass Tech, which is where I met Wendell. We've known each other since we were 15 years old.
Pam Sporn and her subject talked after a showing of her film at the Detroit Historical Museum.
Then I moved to New York for college and stayed, became a high school teacher, taught for many years. I came, I think it was in 2009, to stay with a friend. And I was just taken aback by the devastation that I saw. So I had a lot of questions. Detroit just became much, much more on my radar than it had been over the last few years.
Within my one route, you have townhouses, really nice apartments, really messed up apartments.
Watkins' route covered parts of New Center and Virginia Park, just north of the Fisher Building.
You have 3 blocks in particular that are very well kept up and very spacious houses. There's 6 or 7 the other blocks of my route. Half the houses that were there 10 years ago are gone.
So I said to Wendell, can I follow you around your postal route, and maybe your postal route's like a microcosm for the city. Let's see what we can learn. And he said, fine.
Now, this is a hell of a nice building. You think of this drunken brick. You don't hardly even see drunken brick nowadays. The guys that owned it decided not to do anything to it. So all the people that were there left. This is a microcosm of what happens when you get these gigantic corporations buy up places, do absolutely nothing to them. The people that want to live there leave. So then they just board it up and hold it for speculation.
I thought it was going to be a 20-minute short.
This is typical. This is like one of like maybe 9 buildings in my route that ended up like this.
Come in, follow Wendell around for a week, slice of life, day in the life of a mail carrier. We learn all about Detroit. But then I realized that the depth of analysis and the necessary historical context wasn't going to be delivered in that short amount of time. And particularly because the narrative about Detroit has been so oversimplified, I wanted to make sure that we got things that really looked at history critically.
I remember growing up, hearing all these stories about how great Detroit used to be, with the understanding that it never would be great. Again, that's kind of how people talked about it, and me wondering why that was true, what changed, why weren't things being fixed up, why weren't places looking beautiful again, and it was a question that plagues me. I loved the city, and I didn't want to have to move, but I was being told that the way to be successful was to move away. My great-grandmother was the first to come to Detroit from Hurtsboro, Alabama.
Hurtsboro.
Which is a really interesting name, right?
Gonna hurt down here, boy.
Excited to get out of here, it hurts.
My grandfather would always encourage us to be curious, and my mother, being his daughter, always did the same. And I was always very curious and had a lot of questions to ask people, and as a result, I kind of always was very interested in people and what they had to say. You got here right before I got here, right? January '86?
I moved in October of '87.
Okay. Most of the people that are actually in the movie have been on the route for at least 5-6 years, and some for a lot longer than that.
When I was growing up, it was mostly professional people, working class people. They kept their lawns up. We had dogs. Yeah. You know, it was back in the day when it was safe to play on the street. You know, there was a time when you could get on the bus and go downtown and shop for whatever you needed. You know, come home with a bunch of bags. My grandmother would dress us up to take us downtown.
This building does stand out, though, to me.
You think so?
Absolutely.
There are really wonderful people in this building. We're more like one big family, and the manager of the building is our mama.
You were the first black manager around here, too?
I think I was.
I think my favorite part of the film is talking to Miss Owens, where Miss Owens tells us about her growing up, and those descriptions are so vivid.
Let me tell you about Hastings.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, this is just sketches.
Sure, that's what it's all about.
You know, there was the Willis Theater. I saw vaudeville at the Willis show.
Can you remember any acts you saw there?
Was it Ma Rainey?
Oh, get out of here.
Huh?
Jesus Christ, that's a
A
long time.
long time ago.
I learned so much.
The presence of any African Americans in a neighborhood meant that a neighborhood was colored red on the maps that were used by banks to determine whether or not a neighborhood was safe for lending.
A lot of people who see the film remark about the redlining map. They said, that map is for every city. And we see this pattern repeated around the country where neighborhoods were selected for being disinvested and being abandoned, and there are people in those neighborhoods. It's not just, it's like we think of houses and home loans, but that's people involved in that. So when you're saying you're not going to, yes, you draw a red line around a map, but you're drawing red lines around people.
Sporn and Watkins head north on Woodward up to 8 Mile and west to Wyoming to see a landmark from the 1940s called the Burwood Wall.
So once I learned about it, I said, okay, well, this has got to be explored in this film.
This is the wall that used to demarcate where they're gonna have the white neighborhood from the black neighborhood. One side black, the other side white. Just simple as that. When redlining at its most literal.
We used to hang out with a friend who lived on Griggs near almost to 8 Mile, I think, around there, which is just a few blocks from where the Burwood Wall is. And I never knew anything about that.
You want to talk about what I think about the people from Detroit that I talked to that saw or didn't see the movie, was how much they didn't know about any of this stuff. It's not just that it's here, but it's that that happened, you know. A whole lot of people from the South came up here, black and white, with the same old attitudes. Yeah, in the North. Detroit's always been up South. Everybody kind of knows this. It's just like this cartoon kindergarten type explanation about everything happening in Detroit. Well, you know, we don't know how to run nothing, and you know, well, here's burn up the city, or you know, my neighborhood is nothing like it used to be because once this happened. It's all nonsense. It's like easily compartmentalized way of explaining things that you don't understand, which unfortunately is a human trait. If you don't understand it, you want to understand it, even if it's nonsense. You actually have to learn to understand something. It takes too much time. I don't want to see something that I have to think about. I was wondering, do you recognize these people up here? Yeah. Yeah?
In the last conversations in the film, Watkins gives some of his history to school children who've come to the neighborhood.
This is a newspaper ad from the Detroit News, I believe, from the day that I was born. In April 24th, 1956. 2 rooms, partially furnished, newly decorated, good transportation, shopping, white adults.
What does that mean?
That means they only would rent it to white people. Look at this, it's colored. Colored.
And I thought, oh, to do these kinds of histories is healing work. It's not just history. It's healing to tell children, this is not you.
Got rid of this kind of nonsense. People fought together and organized and worked hard to make sure things like this wouldn't happen anymore. All right.
It's a real moment of hope. It's also a cry for us to consider, like, who's the most important? Those children should be the priority for all of us when we think about reimagining and revitalizing a city.